The town of Oakhaven was a quiet one, nestled in the heart of a remote forest. It was the kind of place where everyone knew their neighbors, and the only crime was the occasional petty theft. But one night, all that changed. It was a Friday evening, and the local restaurant, the Hungry Bear, was packed. Families and friends gathered to enjoy a meal and some company. But as the night went on, something sinister began to unfold. One by one, the patrons of the Hungry Bear began to disappear. At first, people thought they were just going to the bathroom or outside for a smoke break. But as the hours passed, and more people vanished, it became clear that something more sinister was at play. The remaining patrons began to panic. They tried to leave, but the doors and windows were locked. They tried to call for help, but their phones had no signal. They were trapped. One by one, the patrons were dragged away into the darkness. Some were heard screaming, while others simply disappeared without a trace. The next morning, the police arrived to find the restaurant empty. There was no sign of the patrons or the staff. The only thing left behind was a trail of blood. The police investigation went on for weeks, but they were never able to find any clues. The case remains unsolved to this day. But the story of the Hungry Bear doesn't end there. Some say that the restaurant is still haunted by the ghosts of the patrons who disappeared that night. They say that if you go to the restaurant late at night, you can still hear the screams of the victims. And some say that if you're unlucky enough to be trapped inside the restaurant after closing, you may never be seen again. Here's one story of a person who claims to have survived a night at the Hungry Bear. I was in high school when I heard the stories about the Hungry Bear. I didn't believe them at first, but then I started hearing them from more and more people. People I knew. People I trusted. One night, my friends and I decided to go to the Hungry Bear to see if the stories were true. We arrived late at night, after the restaurant had closed. We parked our car in the back and snuck inside. The restaurant was dark and silent. The only sound was the creaking of the floorboards beneath our feet. We made our way to the dining room and sat down at a table. We hadn't been there long when we heard a noise. It was coming from the kitchen. We all looked at each other, our hearts pounding in our chests. One of my friends, a guy named Mike, got up and went to investigate. The rest of us stayed at the table, frozen with fear. A few minutes later, Mike came back. His face was pale and his eyes were wide with terror. "We need to get out of here," he whispered. "There's something wrong in the kitchen." We all stood up and started to run. But before we could get to the door, the kitchen door slammed shut behind us. We were trapped. We huddled together in the corner of the room, listening to the noises coming from the kitchen. They sounded like footsteps. Heavy, lumbering footsteps. The footsteps got closer and closer. We could hear them coming down the hallway, towards the dining room. We held our breath, waiting for the end. The footsteps stopped outside the dining room door. We could hear the doorknob turning slowly. The door creaked open, and a figure stepped into the room. It was tall and thin, with long, bony fingers. Its face was hidden in the shadows, but we could see its glowing red eyes. The creature let out a blood-curdling scream. We all screamed and ran for our lives. We managed to escape the restaurant, but we never looked back. I don't know what that creature was, or why it was at the Hungry Bear. But I know one thing for sure, I'll never go back there again.